My daughter forgot to end the call. I heard her say 6 words that I will never stop hearing. He won't even know the difference. I stood there in my own hallway with a bag of birdseed in my hand, and I did not make a sound. 3 months later, she and her husband pulled into my driveway back from a cruise, tan and laughing, and their key would not turn in my front door. Taped beside the frame was an envelope with her name on it. By the time she finished reading it, she was screaming loud enough that the neighbors came out onto their porches. My name is Walter Meserve. I'm 71 years old. For 38 years, I taught high school shop class in a small town outside Asheville, North Carolina, teaching teenagers how to run a table saw without losing a finger and how to measure twice before they ever cut once. I raised one daughter in the house on Redbud Hollow Road, buried my wife from the porch of that same house, and figured I'd spend whatever years I had left right there, fixing what needed fixing and minding my own business. My daughter had a different plan for how my last years were going to go. This is the story of how I found out, and what I did before she ever got the chance to put it into motion. My wife Eleanor died a year and a half ago, in the spring, from a heart that had been tired for longer than either of us wanted to admit. After the funeral, the house felt like it had extra rooms I hadn't noticed before. Rooms with nothing in them but her handwriting on old grocery lists stuck to the fridge. I kept her garden going that first summer because it felt like the last conversation we were still having. My daughter Michelle called me most Sundays, sometimes Wednesdays too, and about 4 months after Eleanor passed, she and her husband Dale drove up from Charlotte with a proposition that sounded, at the time, like the kindest thing two people had ever offered a grieving old man. Dad, you shouldn't be out here by yourself, Michelle said, sitting across from me at my own kitchen table with Dale nodding along beside her. We've been talking. What if we moved in for a while? Help around the place, keep you company, and honestly, it'd help us save up while the market cools off. Win-win. I said yes before she'd even finished her sentence. I was so relieved I nearly cried right there over my coffee. Within a month, they'd given notice on their rental in Charlotte and moved into the 2 bedrooms upstairs, the ones Eleanor and I had once talked about turning into a nursery, back before we understood that particular blessing wasn't going to come our way. For a good while, it really did feel like something had been given back to me. Dale reshingled the shed roof without me asking. Michelle started cooking Sunday dinners the way her mother used to. And some nights, sitting at that table listening to the two of them talk about their week, I told my neighbor Roy across the road that I was the luckiest man in Buncombe County, having my own daughter looking after me in my old age. I had no earthly idea that the young woman refilling my coffee cup every morning was already counting the months until this house, and everything in it, belonged to somebody else. And that somebody was never going to be me. Around the 5th month, small things started shifting. The kind of things a man talks himself out of noticing because he doesn't want to believe what they might actually mean. Dale started referring to the garage as my workshop when he talked to his brother on the phone, even though every tool in that garage had my name engraved on the handle. Michelle repainted the guest bathroom a color Eleanor never would have picked, said the old one made the room feel dark. Dale started asking more questions at dinner. Questions about my pension from the school system, whether the mortgage was paid off, whether I had a living will, whether I'd ever thought about what happens to the house eventually. I told myself a daughter ought to know these things. That's just being responsible. One evening, Michelle mentioned that her friend from nursing school had just inherited her father's place out in Weaverville and sold it inside of 3 weeks for close to $780,000. Cash offer, no repairs needed. Prices out this way are insane right now, Dale said, looking around my kitchen in a way that made the hair stand up on my arms, though I couldn't have told you exactly why at the time. A week later, Michelle had a woman named Rhonda over for sweet tea on the porch, introduced as an old coworker just catching up. I found out much later that Rhonda sold real estate for a living and had already walked my property line with a measuring app on her phone while I was at the hardware store. Looking back now, I can lay it all out like a blueprint, every measurement marked plain. Back then, I just saw my daughter and her husband settling into a routine, and an old man, grateful he wasn't eating dinner alone anymore. I want you to hold on to that feeling, that trust, because it's the same trust that made everything that came after cut as deep as it did once. I finally understood what was happening under my own roof, in the house I'd paid off dollar by dollar, teaching kids how to sand a birdhouse straight. About 7 months in, Michelle started saying things like, Dad, you told me that story twice last week, even on days I hadn't repeated a single word. I lost my truck keys one Saturday morning, same as I had 100 times in 40 years of owning trucks, and by supper, Michelle was telling Dale across the table, like I wasn't sitting 3 feet away, that she was starting to worry about my memory. I laughed it off, told her everybody misplaces keys. She didn't laugh back. Not long after that, Dale started insisting on driving me to my checkups with Dr. Ferris, even though I'd been driving myself to that office for 11 years without so much as a fender bender, and he'd sit right there in the exam room asking pointed questions about memory screenings and early cognitive testing, questions I had never once asked for myself. Michelle started leaving brochures on the kitchen counter. The glossy kind, soft lighting, silver-haired actors smiling over a game of cards, brochures for places with names like Blue Ridge Meadows and Serenity Pines. When I picked one up and asked her about it, she said, easy as anything, "Oh, that's just something I grabbed, Dad, just in case we ever need it down the line." Down the line. That's the phrase she used. I didn't say a word. I didn't want to be the old man accusing his own child of something ugly over a stack of pamphlets. So I kept quiet, kept saying thank you for looking out for me, while some part of me, the part that had spent 38 years reading teenage boys who lied about whose fault it was that a table saw blade snapped, started paying very, very close attention to every word coming out of my daughter's mouth. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in late June. I'd gone out to the garage looking for a can of wood stain I hadn't touched in a year, puttering the way old men do when the house gets too quiet, when I heard Dale's voice coming from the kitchen through the door I'd left cracked open a few inches. He was on the phone, talking low and fast, and from the sound of it, he figured he had the house to himself. "No, listen," he was saying. "The doctor already noted some memory concerns. That's documented now. That's exactly what we need on file. Once we get him settled at Blue Ridge Meadows, the guardianship paperwork basically files itself." I stood frozen in that garage doorway with a can of stain in my hand, my heart going like a hammer against a nail I couldn't see straight to hit. He kept talking. "Rhonda already ran comps on the street. We're looking at right around 780,000 for the house and the 2 acres behind it. Maybe more if we list before the leaves turn. That covers his care for the next 15, 20 years easy. And there's plenty left over for us to finally get out of that apartment." Michelle must have said something back, because Dale laughed, actually laughed, and said, "He won't even know the difference, Michelle. He'll be somewhere nice, somebody'll bring him his meals, and we'll finally be able to breathe. It's not cruel, it's just what makes sense. He won't even know the difference." 6 words. I stood in that garage doorway for what felt like an hour, but was probably closer to 90 seconds, and I did not make one single sound. I set that can of stain down as quietly as I'd picked it up, walked back around through the side yard, and sat down on the porch steps in the June sun, like nothing in my whole life had just cracked down the middle. Even though it had. I want to be honest with you about something. My first instinct standing in that garage was to march into my own kitchen and ask my daughter exactly what kind of person decides her own father won't know the difference. Like I was an old recliner, somebody was finally ready to haul to the curb. But I didn't do that. 38 years in a classroom full of teenage boys teaches you something. And it isn't just how to keep 10 fingers attached to 10 hands. It teaches you how to keep your face steady while somebody's lying straight to you, so you can figure out exactly what they're planning before you ever open your mouth. So that night at supper, I ate Michelle's pork chops and asked Dale how the Panthers were looking this season, same as any other Tuesday. I didn't mention the phone call, didn't mention Blue Ridge Meadows or the $780,000 or the fact that my own daughter's husband had just talked about my future, the way you talk about trading in a car with too many miles on it. I went to bed that night and did not sleep, not for 1 minute. I lay there in the dark, running back through every sweet little comment about those brochures, every sudden interest in my doctor's appointments, every question about my pension and my mortgage and whether I'd thought about eventually. It all lined up now, every last piece, like a pattern I'd been too trusting or too tired to see the shape of. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, lying in the house I'd bought in 1988 with money I'd saved teaching kids to run a lathe, the house where I'd raised the very daughter who now wanted me gone, I made up my mind. I wasn't going to raise my voice. I wasn't going to accuse anybody of anything to their face. I was simply going to find out exactly where I stood, legally and otherwise, before either one of them got the chance to make a single move against me. The following Monday, I told Michelle I had a follow-up with Dr. Ferris across town, and I drove myself there in my own truck, a 2009 Chevy I'd owned since it had less than 10,000 miles on it. Instead of the doctor's office, I drove to see a lawyer named Constance Ridgway, whose office sat above a hardware store on Merriman Avenue. A woman, a former student of mine, had recommended years back when his own parents were going through something similar. I sat across from her desk and told her everything: the phone call, the brochures, the questions about my finances, the whole thing laid out plain as a set of blueprints. Constance listened without once interrupting, taking notes on a legal pad. And when I finished, she pulled up the county property records right there on her screen. Mr. Meserve, she said, I want to make sure you understand this clearly. This house and the 2 acres it sits on are deeded solely in your name, just yours. Unless you've signed some kind of power of attorney or guardianship consent, nobody, not your daughter, not your son-in-law, can sell this property, place you in a facility, or touch a dollar of your money without your say-so. Then she asked me a question that made my stomach drop clean through the floor. Has anyone asked you to sign paperwork recently? Anything described to you as insurance forms, medical authorizations, anything along those lines? And it hit me like a truck. 3 weeks earlier, Dale had left a folder on the kitchen table, told me it was updated homeowner's insurance paperwork the bank needed on file, needed my signature before Friday. I hadn't signed it yet, kept meaning to. Kept telling myself I'd get to it once I found my good pen and my reading glasses. Constance asked me to bring that folder in right away, and 3 days later, when I did, she confirmed exactly what we'd both already started to suspect. It wasn't insurance paperwork at all. It was a petition for limited guardianship, paired with a durable power of attorney, giving Dale and Michelle joint authority over my finances, my medical decisions, and my home. I never signed it. I never will. But finding out it existed changed something in me. I wasn't just a lonely old man being talked about behind closed doors anymore. I was a man whose own daughter had tried to trick him into signing away the rest of his life over a folder labeled to look as boring as a phone bill. Constance Ridgway helped me understand exactly what my options were, and she recommended a realtor she trusted without hesitation, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Denise Okafor, who worked out of an office in Biltmore Park and had a reputation for moving properties fast and quiet when a client needed discretion above all else. I met Denise at a diner 15 minutes from the house, paid cash for both our coffees, and told her plainly that I wanted to sell my property without my daughter or her husband knowing a single thing about it until the deal was already closed. Denise didn't ask why. She just nodded, the way somebody nods when they've heard this exact kind of story more times than they'd like to admit, and told me a house like mine, 4 bedrooms, a finished basement workshop, 2 acres backing up to the woods, could realistically bring close to $780,000 if we moved fast and kept it quiet. I opened a new account at a credit union clear across the county that Dale had never heard of, had my mail rerouted to a P.O. box downtown, and started meeting Denise every Thursday afternoon while Michelle and Dale believed I was at physical therapy for my knee. For the first time in months, I felt like I was standing on solid ground again, and I won't lie to you, it felt better than almost anything had in a long time. To keep the two of them relaxed and moving along on their own timeline, I did something that still puts a smile on my face when I think about it. I let them take me on the tour of Blue Ridge Meadows. I walked those hallways with the soft carpet and the smell of vanilla air freshener, nodded politely at the calendar of bingo nights pinned to a corkboard, told the tour coordinator the sunroom was lovely, all while knowing full well I had zero intention of ever living inside those walls. Dale looked so pleased in the car afterward, telling Michelle on speakerphone that Dad seemed genuinely open to the idea that I nearly felt a flicker of sympathy for him. Nearly. Meanwhile, Denise had my house listed under a private, discreet arrangement, never posted to the sites Michelle or Dale might stumble across scrolling on their phones, shown only to a small circle of serious, pre-vetted buyers. Within 11 days, we had 2 solid offers on the table. The strongest came from a young couple, Marcus and Angela Webb, expecting their second child, who fell hard for the 2 acres out back, where their older boy could run around the way I used to imagine grandchildren running around. Back before I understood that particular chapter wasn't coming for me either. Their offer came in at $780,000, all cash, flexible on closing, no contingencies, exactly the kind of clean, fast deal Constance had told me to watch for and jump on. I sat in Denise's office and signed that agreement with a hand a lot steadier than I expected it to be, thinking about Dale's voice through that garage door, saying, he won't even know the difference, like it was the easiest math in the world. Well, Dale, I remember thinking as I signed my name at the bottom, somebody around here is about to learn a difference real quick. Turns out it isn't going to be me. About 2 weeks after I signed that agreement, Michelle came home from work practically glowing, the same way she used to light up as a little girl bringing home a good report card. Dale's company was sending the two of them on a Caribbean cruise, an anniversary gift from his parents. 10 days, all inclusive, out of Charleston. Michelle was already talking about the excursions she'd booked, snorkeling and some sunset dinner cruise, the whole 9 yards. It's honestly perfect timing, Dad. Michelle told me over dinner that night, having no idea exactly how right she was. While we're gone, maybe think a little more about Blue Ridge Meadows. We could even put a deposit down when we get back, get things moving. I told her I'd think it over. Same steady voice I'd been using for weeks now. And inside, I was already doing the arithmetic. Denise and Constance had closing set to happen in as little as 10 days, once both sides had signed off. And Marcus and Angela, pre-approved and eager, were ready to move the second I gave the word. Michelle and Dale left for the port on a Saturday morning, suitcases stacked by the front door, Michelle reminding me 3 separate times to water her hanging ferns on the porch while they were gone. I stood in the driveway and waved as Dale's SUV pulled out, the same driveway Michelle used to ride her bike down as a girl with training wheels still on, streamers flying off the handlebars. The moment that SUV turned the corner off Redbud Hollow and disappeared from sight, I called Denise Okafor and told her one simple thing. Let's move the closing date up. Let's do it this week while they're gone, before they ever get the chance to walk back in that door and try to stop what was already in motion. The closing happened on a Thursday, 5 days into their cruise, in a small conference room at the title company off Tunnel Road. Marcus and Angela Webb sat across from me, their boy asleep against Angela's shoulder, both of them barely able to sit still with excitement about raising their kids on those 2 acres. I signed page after page, feeling lighter with every single one. When it was finally done, Denise slid a check across the table for $780,000, minus fees and her commission. More money than I had ever seen gathered in one place in my entire 71 years. I'd already found my own new place, a bright little independent living cottage at a community called Cedar Bend, about 40 minutes east near Black Mountain. With a view of the ridgeline out my kitchen window and a small woodshop out back I could putter in whenever the mood struck, nobody chose it for me off some glossy brochure with actors smiling over a card game. I chose it myself, walked it myself, paid for it myself, in cash, and signed my own name on my own lease with my own steady hand. I spent that Thursday afternoon and all of Friday with 2 movers I'd hired quietly weeks in advance, packing up 30-plus years of a life. Eleanor's good china, my father's old hand tools, the photographs off every wall, everything that actually meant something, and left the rest behind for the Webbs, who were glad to take the furniture off my hands at a fair price, rather than see it go to a dumpster. By Friday evening, the house on Redbud Hollow Road belonged entirely to Marcus and Angela Webb and their 2 boys. The locks had already been swapped out by a locksmith Denise arranged, and I was sitting on the little front stoop of my new cottage in Black Mountain, watching the sun drop behind the ridge with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, feeling more peace settle into my chest than I had felt in well over a year. Before I left Redbud Hollow for the last time, I sat down at the kitchen table where Eleanor and I had eaten breakfast together for 39 years, and I wrote one final letter, not to be cruel, just to finally be honest. I taped it to the front door, right at eye level, in an envelope with Michelle's name written across the front in the same handwriting I used to sign her permission slips for field trips. I told her I knew everything. I told her I'd been standing in that garage doorway on a Tuesday afternoon in June with a can of Stain still in my hand when I heard Dale tell her on the phone that I wouldn't even know the difference, and that I'd heard the number $780,000 talked about like it already belonged to somebody else. I told her the house had been sold, fair and square, and completely legal, to a young family who was going to fill those 2 acres with the sound of children, the way this place was always meant to be filled. I told her I wasn't furious anymore. Not really, just carrying a disappointment that sat heavier in my chest than any anger ever could, and that I hoped one day she understood exactly what it feels like to be the one somebody decides is inconvenient. I told her not to bother calling the house line, since it belonged to strangers now, but that I would answer if she ever called just to say she was sorry, and actually meant every word of it. I signed it the way I'd signed every birthday card and note to that girl since she was 6 years old. Love, Dad. Then I locked that door for the very last time, climbed into my truck, and drove away from Redbud Hollow Road without looking in the rearview mirror once. Not even a glance. Michelle told me later, though I didn't hear it from her own mouth until nearly 3 weeks after, that she and Dale pulled into the driveway on Redbud Hollow that Saturday evening, still sunburned and relaxed off the ship, Michelle already chattering about her ferns and unpacking. Dale walked up to that front door with his key out, same as he'd done 10,000 times before in his life, and it simply wouldn't turn. He figured the lock was jammed, jiggled it, tried again, called back over his shoulder to Michelle that something was wrong. That's when Angela Webb opened the door from the inside, holding her sleeping toddler against her hip, confused, asking Dale who he was and why he was trying to force his way into her family's house. According to my neighbor Roy, who watched it all unfold from his own porch across the road, Dale stood frozen on the steps a long moment before he even noticed the envelope taped beside the doorframe with Michelle's name across the front. Roy said Michelle read it first, standing right there in the grass in the fading evening light, and that her hands started shaking somewhere around the second paragraph. He said Dale grabbed the letter out of her hands when she couldn't get through the rest of it, read it himself, and that's when the screaming started, right out there on the front lawn, loud enough that 3 neighbors came out onto their porches to see what in the world was happening. Roy said Michelle sat straight down in the grass, right where she stood, and Dale just stood there, holding that letter, staring at a house that no longer had one single thing inside it belonging to him, in front of a young family he'd never laid eyes on a street he'd been so sure would be his free and clear within the year. My phone started ringing about 6 minutes later. I didn't answer, not that night. Michelle called me 22 times over the next 4 days. I let every one of those calls go straight to voicemail, not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I wanted her to sit, even for a few days, inside the exact feeling she'd been so ready and willing to hand me. On the 5th day, sitting on the little stoop of my cottage in Black Mountain, with the ridgeline going purple in the evening light, I finally picked up. Her voice cracked before she'd even finished saying, "Dad, we didn't mean it the way it sounded. Please, we can fix this. Just tell us where you are." I let her talk for a good while. Let her get all the way through the apologies and the excuses about stress and money and how everything had just gotten away from the two of them faster than they meant it to. And when she finally ran out of words, I told her the truth as plainly as I knew how. I told her I'd heard every word of that phone call in June, that I knew about the guardianship papers dressed up to look like insurance forms, that I'd known exactly what Blue Ridge Meadows and $780,000 meant to her and Dale for months before either of them ever said a single word to my face about any of it. I told her I wasn't going to yell at her, not because she'd earned that mercy, but because she was still my daughter and I still loved her. And love was never going to change the fact that I didn't owe her a house. I'd spent 38 years teaching other people's children to pay off free and clear. I told her I was happy, genuinely happy, in a place I'd chosen with my own 2 hands, surrounded by people my own age who treated me like a man and not like a problem waiting to be solved. Before I hung up that phone, I told her the door wasn't shut forever. Not completely, but that it would only open again once she was ready to see me as her father, and not as $780,000 standing between her and the life she thought she was owed. I set the phone down on the little table beside my coffee and looked out at that ridgeline one more time, feeling, for the first time in longer than I could honestly remember, completely and finally at peace with the man I'd raised her to become someday. Even if that day hadn't come yet, if you've made it this far with me, then you already know exactly what it sounds like when a quiet man finally stops staying quiet.